So thank you for coming this morning. I thought it was a little early, but you all made it. More importantly, I made it because I thought it was kind of early. But welcome to the Paramount and CBS midterm election briefing. I'm Dee Dee Lieh, and I lead global government relations and public policy for Paramount Global based here in Washington. And I just want to thank you all for coming and thank all of my CBS colleagues for coming. I think that you are going to enjoy what we have for you, which is a review and our view of the midterm 2022 elections, which probably will be, I know, we all say this is the most important election. This is the most important election. I think they're all important, and this one will be pretty important as well. So hopefully everyone in this room is registered to vote and will vote and do your civic duty. For those of you who don't know, there's probably only two of you, but I'll say it anyway. Paramount Global is the parent company of CBS, MTV, Nickelodeon, BET, Showtime, Comedy Central, VH1, Paramount Pictures, Paramount Plus, Pluto TV, our streaming services. Did I get everybody? Did I always tend to forget one division. Simon & Schuster Books. There you go. Simon & Schuster Books. Thank you very much. We are #1 in key target U.S. demos. We have a global reach of more than 4.3 billion subscribers across more than 180 countries. I bet a lot of you didn't know that. And today I'm actually proud that we get to showcase some of the best and brightest, not only within the company, but I would say just in news around the world, our CBS colleagues who are here today. Now it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Norah O'Donnell. We all know Norah as the anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News, as well as the anchor of the CBS News election specials, including primary, debate, and election nights, and as a contributing correspondent on 60 Minutes. She is a multiple Emmy Award-winning journalist with more than 2 decades of experience. She started when she was 5, covering the biggest stories in the world. Take it, girl, take it. Covering some of the biggest stories in the world and conducting impactful newsmaking interviews. She has covered 6 presidential elections and has traveled around the globe to interview many of the world's most important leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to have her with us today, Norah O'Donnell.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be introduced by one of the most powerful women in Washington, D.C. Who represents our global company so well at Paramount Global. It's so good to see so many of you early this morning. People from the White House, people from the Hill, people from cabinet departments. Some of you I have known for those 20 years when we covered campaigns together or were out on the campaign trail together, as well as ambassadors and people from many different offices as well. So thank you all for being here. Special treat this morning because we have the powerhouse team of CBS News to give you a preview of what we are going to see on election night. We will be live on election night starting, well, all day long, starting in the morning on CBS Mornings, but then all throughout the day on streaming, then on CBS Evening News at 6:30, and then we begin our live coverage on the network at 8 p.m. and it goes through 2 a.m. covering through for our West Coast team. So incredibly powerful reporting. I've seen the set that's going to be in New York, the graphics that we have to give all you the latest results, and of course this incredible team of analysts. We know we are 19 days to go before the midterms. Some of you that work on the Hill know that all too well, so thank you for being here. And so what we're doing is something unique at CBS News. We know there are a lot of channels out there that people can choose from. So we've used our really important research and analytical team to break it down in some key groups. And so we think, and this is based on our smart election team, research team, 4 groups. Pressured parents, how are they going to vote? Restoring Roe voters, how are they going to vote? The Trump true believers, and the young and the restless. That's not the soap opera, that's the group of voters that we're also talking about. So we know ultimately this election is going to be about issues, inflation at a 40-year high. We keep saying gas prices are on the rise, but I did double check because actually they're down 2 cents this week, gas prices. And so what issues are driving people to the polls? So let me, without further ado, introduce our panel. Margaret Brennan, many of you know, the moderator of Face the Nation and our chief foreign affairs correspondent. You can all see Margaret during the week, but also on Sunday, interviewing some of the most powerful people in America and around the world. Welcome, Margaret. Thank you. Major Garrett is our chief Washington correspondent, has also covered the White House and the Hill, and many of you know him well, and now he is the author of a new book called The Big Truth, which I highly recommend reading. And as some of you saw him walk in with his suitcase, he's off to travel the country, talk about his book, and do reporting. So thank you, Major. We're glad you're here. And Caitlin Huey-Burns is a CBS News political correspondent. She has been following the impact of the overturn of Roe versus Wade and has been out on the campaign trail, so we're going to get her on-the-ground perspective and reporting. So please welcome. Margaret, I'm going to start with you because those 4 groups that I broke down about how we're looking at the landscape of voters out there, explain them.
Okay. And good morning to all of you. The one thing Norah didn't say is that we are all at CBS News sponsored by caffeine at this point, this close to the midterms. I think we're all on our 5th cup this morning. Thank you all. So this is an exciting project that CBS launched this year. And our team of pollsters who are just fabulous, Anthony Salvanto and his group in New York, are constantly crunching the numbers throughout the year and pulling out trends. And we do some of these focus groups on Face the Nation, which our executive editor of politics and executive producer Mary Hager is in the back and deserves a lot of credit for that. But the 4 groups, just to whip through them real quick. One of them, pressured parents. This is roughly about 13% of likely voters. The Roe restorers you mentioned, you've heard a lot about them. This is a very well-informed audience, so I won't go through some of what you already know, that they're largely Democratic, largely women, about 24% of estimated likely voters, according to Anthony's numbers. Young and the restless, that's about the 6% under 30, but they could be making a difference if they show up. As always, it's about turnout, but for those who are in that younger demographic who feel like the last generation had it a bit easier, there's that question of disaffection and motivation there. So we'll be watching that. And then the Trump true believers. And this name, Donald Trump, is not on the ballot, as you know, but these are people who define themselves first as part of the MAGA movement, secondarily as Republicans. And this is the center of gravity for the Republican Party, as we know. So this is about 20% of likely voters, according to our team's numbers. So that's the breakdown. The thing that I'm most passionate in terms of watching trend, because I think it's reflective of what's different now, wherever we are. I don't think post-pandemic is right where we are, but I don't think we have the phrase yet for where we are in going through the trauma we've been living through, coming out of COVID and going through it. But it's that pressured parents number, and that's about 13%. And this is what we've seen harnessed effectively, one could argue, in the state of Virginia by the governor there when he focused in on education and that issue of what's taught in the classroom. In many ways, as we were talking about it on the show and in focus groups, the theme we heard with parents was lack of control. It wasn't so much just about the topic, it was the, I can't protect my kid. I can't protect them from school shootings. I don't know if they wear a mask or not. I don't know if their school's open or not. The educational quality decline, which is now measurable in terms of reading scores and math scores that we've seen the education department studies come out showing really that there is a measurable impact on our kids. And then you just look at the mental health crisis that we have seen. And we heard that very passionately in these focus groups from parents. So that's why we're calling them pressured parents. And really, I think all of you know a lot of these stories very well. But this dynamic in terms of frustration and anger, and particularly in this demographic of parents, is something I'm interested in tracking to see. And the reason we're doing this is because I think, and I know the team thinks, that these terms, Democrat and Republican, really fail to reflect the American experience right now and fail to reflect the nuance of what we are hearing from voters. And you really have to understand people's motivations to understand what's powering the election.
And so on that point, some people think this is a question of whether you're being driven by inflation and the economic issues or the overturning of Roe versus Wade. The simple way to talk about it is jobs versus Dobbs. But it's more complicated than that. And that's why we have this group broken out, right?
It is more complicated. I mean, when we look at the national numbers, economy, inflation, top all else across the board for voters. In certain states, there's differences in terms of nuance and rankings. I was looking at the Nevada numbers that came out this morning from our team, and you see economy, inflation, crime there as top concerns among their voters. But in a state like Nevada, abortion's protected under the state constitution. Is there a factor there that's a little bit different? I mean, there's so much, Norah, that we're going to be talking about November 8th, going well into the late hours. But inflation, 100%, is one of the top concerns at kitchen tables across America. This cuts across virtually every single demographic. And it's not one that really the parties have an affirmative case to make. It's really one when we see, and this is interesting in Anthony's polling that he talked about on Sunday's program, the blame isn't solely placed on politicians, which anyone knows, monetary policy and central bankers have a huge role, it's their job, to really be focused in on controlling inflation. But there is the perception and the frustration and the anger we're seeing among Democratic voters that the president and his party could be doing more. Exactly what that means isn't clear, but you heard the president make some announcements on that front.
Right, and Major, you look so closely at many of these House races and Senate races. We've seen where that's trending. Explain what we've seen just in the last couple of days, everybody's data.
So the trend lines are sort of reasserting themselves pre-Dobbs. Before Dobbs, there were three dominant issues that were net on the Republican side: inflation, crime, immigration. Those issues have not gone away. But with the Dobbs decision, there was sort of a circuit breaker in that sense of momentum and sense of that issue matrix favoring Republicans. That circuit breaker still exists, it hasn't disappeared, but its intensity may have begun to dissipate. And those three previously relevant issues remain relevant. When voters tell you something is important to them over a long period of time, you can bank on the fact that those sets of issues are persistently important to voters. And that's what we're seeing. Is it a resurgence? I wouldn't say that, but it is a rebalancing of those three issues pre-Dobbs and now after what appears to be a diminished intensity around Dobbs and related privacy issues. But lots of Democrats, maybe those in this room, will tell you that is anecdotal, it's reflected in the data, it's not a collapse, and that rebalancing still means all four issues are relevant, and as we always say, turnout matters a lot. One thing I will say,
any chance the Democrats hold the House?
Of course there is a chance. I think it is a minimal chance. It would be really, really historic to hold the House with this very slim current majority. Not out of the realm of possibility, but very difficult. And when you see Republicans, as they are, investing in marginal races that they were not investing in a month ago, that tells you they think there is something out there that they can grab seats that they didn't think they could grab a month ago. And money dictates strategy. Money tells you what the strategy is. Money tells you what the strategic insights are. And that money is chasing marginal seats. So Republicans are feeling more confident in this atmosphere, and their money is chasing that confidence.
And the CBS estimates are that they will take the House with a 6-seat advantage.
One thing I would say about election night, I think this is really, really important. I want to give you three words, all begin with the letter V. Void, volatility, and violence. The void, what is the void? On election night, we're going to have a lot of close races. And when close races occur, those who do the professional work of election administration are under the most pressure. These people have been pressurized in unwelcome and unprecedented ways since 2020. Their anxiety level has never been higher. They know they're on the spotlight, so they're going to work extra hard and take extra care to make sure everything is done and done right. That will take time, which means the void is we will not be able, in all likelihood, to declare winners even by 1 a.m. Eastern in some races. And on the west coast of the United States, where keep your eye on Oregon, keep your eye on Washington, there's weird things happening there, but in California, a lot of House races, Nevada, Arizona, there are going to be a lot of things that are going to be important to rendering a judgment on what this election was or wasn't late, West Coast. Those results will not be known. So we're going to have this void. What's the volatility? In that void, bad actors who've spent the last 2 years baselessly questioning elections could inject themselves into that void and say, well, we don't know if that means something bad is going on. That brings me to violence. You can't look at January 6th and say, oh my gosh, that could never happen again. You have to tell yourself it's possible. I'm not predicting it, but you can't say that's not possible. And in this era of distrust sown by the baseless allegations against the 2020 election, violence is possible. So in that void, in that time of volatility, you could see scattered bits of violence across our country. And if you see it in one place, and I know election officials, because I've talked to them, fear this, a kind of psychic domino effect going across the country. That is something we cannot rule out. I'm not trying to bring this whole room down, but we have to look at things as they are. And this atmosphere is more intense, and the risks and the stakes feel higher to people who are voting and people who are watching this process play out. So those are the three things I'm very much paying attention to, not just on election night, but in that void period of days, however many it may be, after election day.
Isn't this the smartest analysis that you have heard anywhere?
Yes.
I mean, we all read a lot and watch television. I'm so proud of the CBS News team because I have this rule, which is tell me something I don't know, and always they know much more than anybody else does. You guys are all so terrific. And Caitlin Huey-Burns has been out on the campaign trail. Tell me what you've been seeing. What, in terms of everything we've just heard, what do you know from the ground?
Yeah, and thank you, and thanks so much for having us. This is such a treat to do these things in person again. What I think is undeniable is that the Dobbs decision changed the dynamics of this race. We saw that Democrats were, facing a president that had a very low approval rating. The economy is bad. Inflation is high. Things just don't feel good. People feel a lot of what you're feeling, this uncertainty, this nervousness about a lot of different things. But when Dobbs came down, that gave Democrats a reason to proactively get people to register to vote and to get involved in the process. And so I think the way to kind of measure that is a couple different ways. One, voter registration we saw ticked up, especially among women in key battleground states, especially places like Pennsylvania. We saw it in the data that, and this is where it's nuanced, abortion access has never been a top issue for voters. It's always been an issue since Dobbs, but it's not been the top issue. Economy and inflation has always been consistently in our polling the top. But among Democrats, it's been the top issue. And what we saw over the weekend was, to your point, kind of a signal that might be dissipating. But it's still, when you look at these matchups in these key Senate races, the driver for Democrats is the issue of abortion access. But again, that's nuanced because it all depends on what state you live in, what access you have in your state, to Margaret's point about Nevada, and what your state legislature looks like. And I think that's also something that we really have to pay attention to this cycle, which is these governor's races and these state legislatures, because as we saw with the Dobbs decision and with other decisions, that is where most of the lawmaking really affects your personal life. And so I'm kind of looking at investments there in those states. But on the ground, I will say that we have seen the reaction to abortion have an effect in terms of getting people involved in the process that wouldn't necessarily have been. I remember I was in Wisconsin recently, and we talked to a hostess at a bar that we went to talk to voters, because that's where you talk to voters, right? And over bratwursts and cheese curds and the whole thing. We really indulged. But she said, I don't really know much about politics. Why are you asking me? And I said, well, what issues do you care about? And she said, well, abortion. I really care about that. And that, I think, is kind of where it could possibly make a difference. But time and time again, you ask voters what their top issue of concern is, and it's always been the economy. It's always been inflation, no matter who they're voting for. And I think it's important because it not only speaks to high gas prices, which, as you mentioned, are kind of ebbing and flowing, but just things cost a lot. To Margaret's point, childcare costs a lot. Everything in your life just feels kind of heavy, right? And that's what voters have been telling us. The other issue, too, that I would bring up is the issue of crime that I've been hearing more and more come up. Again, I was just in Wisconsin. Even voters that were supporting Democrats noted to me that, I don't feel good about safety right now. And so you see in advertising a very specific focus in some of these battleground states on that issue. And I think that's something to watch. But I think there is no question that without the Dobbs decision, you wouldn't see the competitiveness, I think, in some of these key races. I was recently in North Carolina where abortion access is legal. It's actually one of the few states in the South that hasn't implemented some of these restrictions that we've seen elsewhere. They have a Democratic governor, but a Republican state legislature, and that's become kind of a haven for abortion access. Republicans I talk to in the state say they don't want that necessarily to be the case, but they were very much focused on the economy. Democrats thought that that was something that makes that race competitive in a situation where it may not have been. So that's why we have to your point, look at the enthusiasm among Democrats. Can they grow that? And can that speak to independent voters, especially women, who are also navigating all of these other concerns about the economy?
Caitlin has been looking at, too, these voter registration numbers, whether they've increased among women, where it's having a factor and an impact in terms of driving turnout. Our time is up, but I mean, I could keep going. I'm thinking we got to do a whole hour of this on streaming. This is such good stuff. So thanks to all of you. Good luck on your travels.
I got a plane to
every
catch.
one of you. And you'll see us on election night. Thank you. Just some business. Coming up later this morning, our colleague Nikole Killion, who covers The Hill, will interview DNC advisor Cedric Richmond. Excited about that. But first, I'd like to introduce our chief CBS News election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa, who's going to speak with Republican Congressman Jim Banks. So please welcome that.
Cheers. Thank you, Nora. Is this on? Thank you very much, Nora. Really appreciate it. Great job by the panel. Thanks for all of you coming here this morning. I'm Bob Costa with CBS. This is Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana, a Republican. He is the chairman of the Conservative Republican Study Committee in the House of Representatives, which is a large group that's grown over the years of conservatives in the House. He is also, based on CBS News reporting, considering a bid for the leadership should the House Republicans win the majority, to perhaps run for majority whip, which would be the number 3 position. Really appreciate you taking the time here this morning.
Good to be here. Good morning.
So, Congressman, do you believe at this moment that the Republicans will win the House? And if so, how many seats would that majority be?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, if I'll make any prediction, it is that we will win the House majority and by a double-digit margin. We can get into numbers.
Give us a number.
I'll predict that we'll win 25 seats of a 20-seat majority.
What gives you that confidence?
This morning, Real Clear Politics tells us that the generic ballot Republican advantage is what it was the day before the Dobbs decision. So the voters have crystallized. The elections have crystallized in a way that shows us that the red wave is still there. The American people are focused on kitchen table issues. If there's ever been an election in my lifetime that's a kitchen table election, inflation, crime, the border, and gas prices being the focus of the vast majority of the American voters, it's this election. And they're going to give Republicans an opportunity to check the Biden administration and the power of the Democrats that have led us down this perilous path that the American voters are suffering from today.
What's the House GOP's closing strategy? Is it about persuading independent voters, or is it about turning up that base?
Every poll that you look at in America shows that hard and soft Republicans, the top 3 issues are the border, inflation, and gas prices, and crime. Look at the Democrat voters, whether you're looking at polling in my district, a red district in Northeast Indiana, or throughout the country. What are they focused on? They're focused on abortion, January 6th, and Trump. No economic issues register in the top issues that hard and soft Democrats are focused on. But when you look at independent voters, they mirror Republican voters. Again, they're focused on kitchen table issues. So a few weeks ago, Republicans unveiled our Commitment to America, and it is a framework, a substantive legislative framework to focus on just that. And we pledged that our number one bill, H.R. 1, will be an energy independence bill that will bring down gas prices. It's not a strategy, it's just common sense.
What about abortion rights? I just got back from Ohio. Caitlin Huey Burns was talking about abortion rights. Many Democratic candidates for the House and Senate expect their core voters to be galvanized by how that issue has turned in the past year. How do you see it?
Well, again, the generic ballot is back to what it was the day before the Dobbs decision. So as voters come to realize the extreme positions of the left on abortion, remember the House Democrats passed the Women's Health Act that would have legalized abortion up to 1 week or 1 day before birth. So the radical position of the left on abortion has become a defining part of this election narrative as well.
Well, the Republicans, Senator Lindsey Graham proposed a 15-week ban on abortion, a federal ban on abortions at 15 weeks. Is that part of the House GOP agenda should they win the majority?
Well, it's not a part of the Commitment to America. I mean, the Republican Party is the pro-life party. I'm unapologetically pro-life, and so are the Republican voters. But when it comes to the abortion issue, one thing that I think the mainstream media is missing in the abortion debate is that it places the attention on state legislative races. In Indiana, my state was the first state to call a special session and pass a abortion ban bill with exceptions right after the Dobbs decision. So the abortion issue becomes a more central theme in state legislative races. Again, 80% of Americans say America is on the wrong track. They're voting in this election on kitchen table issues. Inflation has caused the average American family to lose the equivalent of 1 month of their salary in this last calendar year. Gas prices are rising again. They might have dipped a couple of cents this week, but the American people are feeling pinched by it. High crime rates have affected a lot of voters as well, and the border, the drug epidemic, fentanyl now the leading cause of death of Americans our age. Robert, 300 Americans a day dying of a fentanyl poisoning. That affects big and small communities and districts like mine and all over the country. And the Democrats completely ignore these issues, and the American voters see it for what it is. That's what they're going to vote on in national elections. And that's why I have a good sense the red wave is going to culminate on November 8th.
So you mentioned issues like immigration. Let's say the House Republicans have the majority. What should the American people expect on that issue? Will there be impeachment proceedings against Secretary Mayorkas? Is that on the agenda? Is it going to be impeachments against cabinet secretaries, whether it's Secretary Mayorkas, Attorney General Garland, President Biden? Are impeachment talks going on? Is that something we should expect if you have the majority?
Well, first and foremost, the big push for House Republicans will be to secure the border, return back to the Trump policies that we know.
But should we expect impeachments or not?
Well, let me get to that after I say that we will use the leverage points that we have in the majority to force this administration to secure the border that has caused the biggest humanitarian crisis in American history. After that, you will see a vigorous oversight agenda of House Republicans that will, in each of the committees, will be evident. Armed Services Committee, I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and we will investigate the debacle that happened in Afghanistan just over a year ago that cost the lives of 13 of our service members. And we will investigate on the Judiciary Committees, the Homeland Security Committees, the travesty, the humanitarian crisis at the border. If those investigations and oversight initiatives lead to other courses of action, like impeaching Secretary Mayorkas, I can't predict that at this point. We have to go through the process that you haven't seen House Democrats at all go through over the last couple of years, and that's provide adequate oversight of this administration.
So that's on the table. Interesting.
Sure.
Foreign policy. Minority Leader McCarthy recently says he doesn't want to have a blank check for Ukraine. Do you agree with him?
Well, I agree that while America is on its knees, we can't provide blank checks to the rest of the world.
And that includes Ukraine right now?
It includes Ukraine and the rest of the world. We have provided substantial support and lethal aid to Ukraine over the last several years, beginning with lethal aid during the Trump administration Javelin missiles and other lethal aid that was not given to them during the Obama administration. And thank God Ukraine had those Javelin missiles to fight back against Russia. That's why they're still on their feet today. And since then, since Russia invaded earlier this year, we've provided a substantial amount of support as well. But I think Republicans do at the same time, and our voters as well, demand accountability for those dollars. And our voters and the American people who are stressed because of what they're enduring here at home are demanding that we focus on our domestic issues before we solve the biggest problems around the world.
Should funding be cut off to Ukraine or decreased in your view, or increased?
Well, I would expect, just like you will see the National Defense Authorization Act pass in the midterm, it will continue to provide substantial lethal aid to Ukraine. I don't see it being shut off, but these blank checks, these large bills like the $40 billion bill that passed recently, America is demanding that we focus on bringing down inflation, bring down gas prices, secure the border, address crime before we try to solve problems around the world.
Looming next year, the full faith and credit of the United States, a debt limit extension will be on the agenda for whomever is in the majority. Should the debt limit talks, whenever they do happen next year, it's a bit of a vague date at this point, should the debt limit marker be an opportunity for negotiations with the White House on issues like spending, or should that debt limit just be put aside because it's too risky to include that in a political discussion?
No, I think it has to be. It's a major leverage point for the House Republican majority to use to control spending. And we've seen the national debt now surpass $31 trillion. It is a key driver of inflation. We have to use a moment like that to do things that the administration wouldn't otherwise do, that Democrats don't support. Like,
There are enormous risks to that.
spending caps, balanced budgets, cut wasteful discretionary spending. That has to be on the table when it comes to a debt limit vote. And I think Republicans are uniformly in support of using that moment as an opportunity to do something about spending.
I covered those fights a decade ago. You're a business-friendly Republican. A lot of business leaders don't like when the debt limit's used as a leverage point.
Well, I hope that the Biden administration doesn't take us to that point of threatening a shutdown. I don't know why we can't come together to address spending issues. And the debt limit is a serious time to bring us together, both parties, the White House and the Congress, to find solutions.
Does Kevin McCarthy have the votes locked up for Speaker should the Republicans win the majority?
There are no cracks in his support. Kevin McCarthy would be the Speaker of the House. I happen to believe he will be a very effective Speaker who listens to members across the board, from more traditional members to members on the right. Republicans are more unified than I've ever seen them before, not just in our choice for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, but in our agenda. And Kevin's been the quarterback.
And he can count on your vote, Congressman?
He has my full support to be the Speaker. He always has. And I believe he's going to be.
Steve Scalise for number 2 for Majority Leader if you guys win the majority?
Without a doubt. Steve will be the Majority Leader. He's proven himself in leadership the entire time that I've been in Congress. We have a strong leadership team at the top, with Kevin as Speaker and Steve Scalise as the Majority, Elise Stefanik as the conference chair, one of the best communicators.
That's the number 4 slot. Number 3, are you running for whip?
Well, it's not a secret that I'm interested in that. Right now, we are focused, like all Republicans, on winning back the majority. The leadership elections will happen the week after Election Day, so it'll be a quick campaign. I've been a leader in our party over the last couple of years and intend to be a leader in our party moving forward.
Speaking of Indiana Senator Mike Braun might run for governor in 2024. Are you considering a run for the Senate in 2024?
Well, there are rumors about what Mike Braun might or might not do. He hasn't made those known yet, so at this point, this pure speculation.
But are you committed to staying in the House, or are you eyeing another run as well?
I'm focused on winning back the House majority, and there will be opportunities to be a leader in the House Republican majority, and that's what I'm singularly focused on.
When you say you're interested in running for whip, the number 3 post in the House of Representatives, how would you characterize it? Are you leaning into it, let's say 90% there, or are you 50% there?
Well, I'm 100% there, and having conversations with my colleagues about what leadership looks like in the next Congress. We made a significant commitment to America with our agenda. The American people are demanding a lot out of the Republican majority, and I intend to be one of the leaders in the House Republican majority that are making sure that we keep those commitments.
You're close to former President Trump, an ally of his. Do you believe he will run in 2024? Do you want him to run?
I don't know. I mean, President Trump remains the most popular figure in the Republican Party today, overwhelmingly. He brings a lot to the table. He brings voters to the Republican Party that we don't have otherwise. So it's no secret that he's looking at running again. I don't know what that will look like moving forward, if he does or if he doesn't. But if he does, I've said many times, he has my full support. He will be the nominee of the party if he runs in 2024.
Speaker Pelosi said she did not want you to serve on the January 6th committee, so you were not part of that committee. Will the House GOP, if it has the majority, disband that committee, and how will it handle further investigations of the Capitol attack and President Trump?
Well, disappointing that I didn't have the opportunity to serve, because there were serious questions that have never been raised in the highly politicized sham January 6th committee, that if I was on the committee, we would have talked about how to secure the Capitol, crack away at bureaucratic issues with the Capitol Police to make sure that something like January 6th never happens again. I hope, and Leader McCarthy, the leadership of the House Administration Committee on the Republican side have made very clear that we will continue investigations into what happened on January 6th to prevent something like that. I have no doubt that those investigations will go forward. Whether or not the January 6th committee in its current form will continue forward, I'll defer to future Speaker McCarthy about that.
Any quick views on how your fellow Hoosier, former Vice President Mike Pence, who was in Washington last night, handled January 6th? You're an ally of President Trump, who has criticized Pence. How do you see Pence's conduct on that day?
I was with Vice President Pence last week in Indiana, and he's out doing his part to help us win the majority. He's a man of integrity, and respect him greatly. I look forward to reading his book. It's coming out soon. And I don't know.
So
if
he has
will
a
address
future in
these
the Republican
issues.
Party, in your view?
Well, he brings a lot to the Republican Party, and admire him greatly as my former governor, former member of Congress. Our districts were very similar and overlapped greatly. I've had a long-standing relationship with him, admire him greatly, and of course he brings a great deal to the party.
Final question before we get to Nikole Killion, who's going to interview Cedric Richmond from the Democratic National Committee. If the Republicans have the majority in 2023, give us one issue you believe House Republicans can find a consensus with President Biden on. Realistically find consensus.
Well, I hope across the board we can find consensus on all of it, but it's got to be related to bringing down gas prices and inflation, and there will be a responsibility. Hopefully, the election is a wake-up call for Democrats who have ignored these issues, that they have to come back to the table and work with Republicans to solve the issues that matter most to the American people, to bring down inflation, bring down gas prices.
Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, sir. Thanks over here. Thanks for taking the time. Nikole Killion.
Thank you very much to my colleague Robert Costa for that discussion with Congressman Jim Banks. We are now joined by Cedric Richmond, who, after 10 years representing the people of Louisiana in Congress, joined the Biden White House as Director of Public Engagement. He is now a senior advisor to the Democratic National Committee. Cedric, thank you so much for joining us. And I really just want to jump into it. What is the path for Democrats to victory, both in the House and in the Senate?
Well, I think the real job, and you can't really just talk about campaigns without talking about governing also. And I think what the biggest need for Democrats is to articulate to American voters what they've been able to deliver and why it matters that they vote. And so what we see is you have to answer what I call the Janet Jackson test, which is, what have you done for me lately? Or the question of why bother? Why bother going out and waiting in line, or filling out an absentee ballot? And, you know, if we just for a moment ignore all the stuff you just heard, 90% of it was inaccurate. You know, I think that you have to talk to seniors about the fact that their prescription drug costs are lower because they voted last election. You have to talk to voters and just articulate the accomplishments. So that's why you see President Biden out doing more policy type events than rallies, because he's touting what we've been able to do and been very intentional about it. So I just think that Democrats have to do that. And the hard part of campaigning is knocking doors, talking to voters. If I had a magic wand, I would send Democrats into more hostile territory so that they can address issues. You know, and combat lies. So we just had 20 minutes of gas prices over and over again, and that something's going wrong. But what you didn't hear is that there's more drilling under the Biden administration than happened under the Trump administration, and that the president said that when Ukraine happened, gas prices would be a result. And, you know, you just heard, you know, applause basically for the people of Ukraine, but you didn't hear the congressman talk about the fact that President Biden spent months and months and months uniting the West in anticipation of the invasion in Ukraine. And the fact that they're still there, it's because of his leadership.
I know you have a bus tour that is kicking off today. CBS News was the first to report that you've got this bus tour launching that will head to a number of battleground states. How are you seeking to drive turnout? Are you seeking to replicate the Biden coalition?
You have to. Look, he had more votes than any other person in the history of the United States. And I think it's about talking about real issues that affect people, addressing real challenges that are affecting them. And we're not here to pretend that everything's rosy. What we're here to talk about is our plan to address those challenges. And I think that you can't talk about today without talking about yesterday. When we took office, you talked about stressed parents. I was one. My 8-year-old was at home on the computer in school, and I wanted him out of the house. But 54% of schools were closed the day we took office. Now 100% of schools are open. And you don't get there by accident. You get there by being intentional. And I know that two of my former White House colleagues are here, and they will attest to the fact that we woke up every day with a mission, and that was to combat the virus and make sure that we are addressing issues that are affecting families. And I think that in a campaign, you just have to articulate to voters.
What are you specifically doing to shore up support among people of color, particularly African American voters, Latino voters, especially since Republicans have been targeting Latino voters, and we are starting to see a shift?
Well, I think that you have to have that hard conversation, and part of what Democrats are doing and need to do more of is have those conversations about where we were, where we're going, and what we've been able to accomplish. So if you look at African American voters, you know, you're fighting misinformation also, because, you know, it took us by storm in the White House when the whole notion that we cut HBCU funding, and you know, that misinformation took off so bad. My mother called me and was like, "What are you doing? Why'd you all cut HBCU funding?" And I was like, "We gave HBCUs more money than any president in the history of the country." So part of it, you know, this is just, to me, a very strange time where the truth is not as relevant as it used to be. And we need to get back to that. You saw the former president attack the media every day. You saw his press secretary say alternative facts. But we have to get back to what I think is, one, credible journalism. And as elected officials, I think we have to be honest with the American people. And, you know, I think that conversation has a place in what's going to happen on Election Day.
I want to pivot to the economy. As you know, that continues to be top of mind to voters. Inflation hit 8.2% in September. Republicans are really trying to take ownership of this issue, and it is motivating Republican and independent voters. Polls are showing that they're right. Tell me why you think they're wrong.
Well, if they want to have an honest conversation about it, they have to talk about the incompetence that led to where we were in COVID. If they want to be honest about it, they have to talk about a president who said go drink bleach. If they want to be honest about it, we have to talk about the fact that, you know, we were looking for partners in the fight to get people vaccinated. I think the president did a yeoman's job in getting it out, getting the country back open, funding state and local governments that were having a problem. We actually paid down the debt and reduced the deficit and all of those things. But I think you have to, you know, the inflation problem is real, and we are doing things to address it. What I think you can't do, though, is pretend it's not there. I think people want solutions to it, They want to know what you're going to do. And I think that if Democrats address the issue head on, I think people will see that they're the responsible party. I mean, you know, the other thing we have to do is compare and contrast. I mean, we just heard somebody say we would use impeachment as leverage. Impeachment is not leverage. Impeachment is something that is hard. You have to take real thought about. Look, I voted to impeach President Trump twice, but he earned it. I mean, you know, withheld aid to Ukraine, and January 6th was all his doing. If you go back to the last debate, it was Proud Boys, stand back, but stand by. He summoned them there on January 6th. He sent them to the Capitol. I was in the building. It wasn't a peaceful tour. So, you know, all of that to say is I just think that what people want is honesty and to know what you're doing. And I think the congressman was right on crime, for example. But Democrats need to...
In what way?
That crime is a big issue.
But what are Democrats doing to counter that argument and that narrative?
Well, Democrats should talk about the most robust crime-fighting plan in the history of this country was authored and passed by President Biden in terms of putting money out there for community violence intervention, for mental health, for summer jobs, for recreation. The approach now to crime reduction is comprehensive. It's never been addressed that way. And we brought Republicans and Democrats together to help on mental health and opioid epidemic and all of those things.
But do you think that's resonating with voters? Because time and again, we see Republicans hitting Democrats on this issue, saying they want to defund the police, they're too soft on crime.
Well, defund the police is a stupid slogan. I mean, it makes no sense. People have alarms on their house, so they call the police. And I think that the problem is that it took on a life of its own. The president, I think Democrats should do exactly what Biden did during his election, which say, no, I'm not for defunding the police. In fact, I want to give him $300 million more so we can hire more police, so that we can have true community policing, so that we can have safer neighborhoods. People don't necessarily not want more police, they just want just policing. And that's the conversation you have. But I think that's one of those issues that you have to take head on and talk about all of the things that this administration has done.
What about the issue of abortion rights? Are Democrats leaning into heavily on this issue as opposed to the economy?
No, I don't think you can lean too heavily into this issue if you want to know the truth. It is a gut-wrenching decision that people have to make. And I think Republicans act like people just make it casually, no big deal. I think that they're dead wrong, and I think women deserve and want their right to choose. I think men are supportive of that and understand the importance of that. And if you look how extreme they are in their position, and I think that that's part of what Democrats have to do on election day, up until election day, is talk about the differences in how extreme the other party is. And so, no, I don't think you can lean too heavily into an issue that is so serious and so important to so many people. So I don't.
You talked at the outset about President Biden, that he really is kind of focusing on doing more of these policy-driven speeches. We have not seen him at a campaign rally since Labor Day. Is he going to get out there more?
Well, you have to remember, both rallies in Orlando were canceled because of things not in his control, one of which was a hurricane. And the one thing I really respect about this president is that he cares more about the American people than himself. And he knows that if he goes to Florida, that he sucks up an enormous amount of police resources, first responder resources, and he didn't want to do that with a hurricane looming.
But he was just out on the West Coast. He went to Oregon. He did not go to Nevada,
well,
where there's a very tight Senate race.
But there's also some important stuff in California, too. One of which is an important mayor's race in Los Angeles, which Karen Bass, I want her to win. I think she's going to win. He stomped for Katie Porter. He went out and did some things with Kirk Bennett in Colorado. He's out there. And I go back to the beginning of what I said is, we have to tell the American people what we've been able to deliver. And I think that that's his role right now, is to talk about all of the things he's been able to do. There are 10 million families in this country that will not have to drink contaminated water out of lead pipes because they went out and voted. He was president and passed the infrastructure bill, which no other president could do, and talked to seniors about reducing drug costs, which no other president was able to do. So, I think his role is two-part, and you'll see rallies, but I think, to me, the most important part is to tell people what he's been able to accomplish, because that has not gotten out there.
You were very instrumental at the outset of his campaign, and I really want to ask you, because there have been so many questions about whether the president will run again in 2024. I know, excuse me, that he said he intends to run, but where is he at in his decision making? What have your conversations been with him on that issue?
I take him at his word. If he says he's running, and I'm with him, and we'll win. And
so you would advise him to run again?
I would advise him to do what he wants to do. I think that he's been probably the most impactful and consequential president in the history of America. If you're talking about reducing child poverty by 50% in 1 year, those types of things don't happen by accident. It happens because you have somebody who's worried about the next generation, not the next election. And so I stand with him. I'm not abandoning him. I think he's done a good job, and I'm going to be with him if that's what he decides to do. But right now, his posture is he's running for re-election. So
when do you think?
What I say is game on.
When do you think he'll make that decision?
I don't know. I really don't. I
mean, after the election?
I would know it's after the election. I would think it's sometime next year. And
early next year?
I mean, I think most people assume that, but I'm not necessarily sure. When he announced for president, everybody said it was too late. Oh, when is he going to announce? It's too late. He does things on his own time schedule, and it's methodical and deliberative, and we'll just watch that process. But in the meantime, the Democratic Party is getting ready for the presidential, laying the infrastructure and through this election in preparation for 2024.
I mean, what do you make of those in the party who are putting some distance and who don't want to commit right now to saying whether or not he should run for a second term?
I think it's stupid. I think it's political malpractice. Ask Karen Maloney how it worked out. I'm not going to bite my tongue. You can't run around the country talking about, oh, we love all these policies without talking about the policy maker who made it happen.
But is it time for a new generation of leaders in the Democratic Party? Including in Congress?
I'm never going to get to the point where I say experience and wisdom is bad. So if you ask me if I want a doctor who's performed 1 million surgeries or a doctor who's on number 10, I'm going to take the doctor who's performed 1 million surgeries. And so I understand the need for diversity at the leadership table. And I think that if you look at President Biden's cabinet, it reflects that diversity. You have a young vice president, an incredible vice president. You have everybody from Pete to Marcia Fudge in the cabinet. I mean, he has that diversity around him, but I'm not going to say that wisdom and experience is bad. If you look at Speaker Pelosi, she's been able to usher in all of these transformational pieces of legislation because she had the experience to do it. So I'm not one of these people to just say, throw people out because they hit a certain age. And, I don't think that that's wise, and I don't think that, you can knock experience and wisdom.
All right, Senior Advisor Cedric Richmond with the Democratic National Committee. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to turn things now to our Washington Bureau Chief, Mark Lima, to conclude the program. Thank you.
So thank you to Nikole. Thank you to our wonderful group of journalists who joined us here today and the special guests. We appreciate it. And I hope today gives you a little sense of what's to come in our midterm coverage, the things that set us apart. I think we have what I believe to be the best team in the business to cover the election. And we team it with extensive polling, which really offers an insight into the electorate and kind of context for all of what we've been talking about today. We also have a great team behind the camera, one of the guys you see here. But our efforts in politics are led by the executive editor of politics, Mary Hager, and by Finn Gomez, our political director, who do a terrific job organizing, or trying to organize, what is a very chaotic time at CBS News. I'd also like to thank DVLA for putting all of this together, and folks here at NAB for being such great hosts. That's going to conclude our program for today. Grab another cup of coffee, a cinnamon bun, and I hope you learned a little bit today and enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks, everybody.